The most influential of the theocratic societies developed in the Valley of Mexico, about 25 miles northeast of what is now Mexico. Its customs, institutions, art, its glory and achievements influenced every society that followed, just as the Roman Empire influenced European societies for centuries. Its center was at Teotihuacan, the house of the gods. Teotihuacan was a ceremonial center. Only the priests, nobility, and people directly concerned with the maintenance of the city lived there. Most archaeologists believe that the common people lived in surrounding villages. It was a good location in which to settle because, unlike much of the rest of Mexico, the soil of the Valley of Mexico was rich. There usually was enough rain to water the crops. At least 20 centuries have passed since Teotihuacan was settled, but the Valley of Mexico is still the heartland of Mexican society, the population center of the nation. We know very little about Teotihuacan. The oldest dated remains are about 2,000 years old, but some of the temples are probably older. Teotihuacan may have been the largest settlement in Middle America. We know that it covered an area of 700 acres before 350 AD, and that it grew to 2,000 acres by 650 AD, about the size of San Francisco. The city was destroyed probably by fire, which burned the wooden columns and interiors, and abandoned forever about 800 AD. Our knowledge of Teotihuacan is based on the ruined temples and art that survived. Many of its traditions are thought to have been continued by later peoples. Theirs was a truly advanced civilization. The people were great architects, carpenters, mechanics, and engineers. Their city was one of the first in the world to be planned, with broad streets and thoroughfares aligned almost perfectly, and zoning to separate living quarters from civic and religious buildings. Their achievements are all the more remarkable because they were accomplished without the use of metal tools. We also know that the social system of Teotihuacan was totally controlled by the religious leaders. The very best artistic work was applied to the temples, and in effect the priests harnessed the labor of virtually the entire population for the fantastic religious constructions. The massive Pyramid of the Sun is one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. It's 700 feet at the base and 200 feet high. It's terraced with variation in slope to give the impression of limitless mass. Walking up the steps, one has the feeling he will reach the stars or the sun at the top. There were many other temples at Teotihuacan, and unfinished remains tell us that the building was never truly finished. The major temples were rebuilt several times. Like its architecture, the art of Teotihuacan was distinctive. Early in the city's history, the people shaped little figurines and incised pottery from clay and used hard stone tools to carve crude idols out of stone. During the first great building period, a Teotihuacan art style developed, a style that lasted for hundreds of years. The people fashioned a lustrous pottery of black and brown, vases of red and yellow, household utensils that today are considered the highest expression of art. Ultimately, the quality of the art deteriorated, mirroring the decline of Teotihuacan society. There is evidence of the decline also in religious ritual. The ceremonies had become more important than the gods themselves. Why did Teotihuacan fall? We are not sure of the answer. But one answer may be that the social structure of Teotihuacan broke down. that there were divisions within the society which ultimately ended in revolt. Perhaps it was caused by a religious reformation, for the rebuilding of the temples is some evidence of extreme changes in religion. And the change in religious attitudes was accompanied by the first evidence of human sacrifice. We can speculate that new gods were demanding offerings more valuable than corn or figurines. Or perhaps in a period of great misfortune, people were anxious to appease the angry gods, and they came to offer man's most valuable possession, life itself. We must remember that human sacrifice is not the invention of Teotihuacan. At some stage in its development, every society on earth has practiced human sacrifice. The rhythm of birth and death and rebirth seen in nature and in the existence of man himself has prompted societies to copy the process by sacrificing humans. The people of Teotihuacan were not different from the ancient Greeks or Gauls or Germans in this respect. Another explanation for the fall of Teotihuacan is that pressures of the growing population led to famine. Perhaps the rains failed and drought destroyed the crops. The society simply was not able to feed itself. Mass graves of children found at Teotihuacan support the theory that people were starving. Another factor is that new people with new ideas began to appear around 750 A.D. Perhaps they overran Teotihuacan, or perhaps their new ideas contributed to the dissension within the state. At any rate, Teotihuacan was destroyed and abandoned. But the people did not disappear. They continued to live in outlying villages. Some nearby cities grew enormously and continued to exist for many years. The Teotihuacan culture, and with it the principle of theocratic society, was officially dead. But its traditions were to affect all the succeeding societies of Mexico. The new peoples in the Valley of Mexico introduced a new era in Mexican history, the militaristic period. The militaristic societies were characterized by warfare and intensive agriculture. The fall of a dominant society is always followed by a period of trouble, even chaos, as in Europe after the fall of Rome. In Mexico, war became a way of life. The military role took precedence over religious functions. The militarists fought wars to defend themselves, wars of revenge. But mostly, the wars were motivated by economic factors, for defeated tribes had to pay tribute to their conquerors. The Toltecs, or master builders, were responsible for the formation of the first great militaristic states in Middle America. The center of their empire was at Tula, which began to grow up before the fall of Teotihuacan and which borrowed much of the knowledge and culture of the theocratic societies. One of the legends of Tula was significant in the future of Mexico. It was about a great and good king who was devoted to peace. He took the name of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. He had a quarrel with Tezcatlipoca, the warrior god. Quetzalcoatl lost and was forced into exile. Eventually, Quetzalcoatl went out to sea and rose into the sky. But before he left, he told the priests he would return. He gave the exact year, and that year was the equivalent of 1519 on our European calendar. Quetzalcoatl was reputed to be fair-skinned and bearded. Remember this legend in the year 1519. And remember that religion was still the most important element in the lives of the Indians. For this legend and the devotion to religion were to play a great role in the future of Mexico. Let's look at the city of Tula. There the militarists divided authority between a religious ruler and a civil ruler. The religious ruler was responsible for the spiritual and material well-being of the people. The civil ruler directed the society and was in charge of military matters. The Toltecs expanded their holdings until their empire included many diverse groups, peoples with different cultures, different languages. Prosperity ultimately destroyed Tula. Its once warlike people settled down to an ordered, peaceful existence, and Tula was destroyed by the end of the 13th century. We think that perhaps it was overrun by barbarians, supposedly from the north, called Chichimecs, just as much of settled Europe was once overrun by barbarians. At any rate, the destruction of Tula was followed by a period of chaos, of political disorganization. In the period after the fall of Tula, wandering warrior bands calling themselves Toltecs because it was a proud name established city-states throughout the valley, and each competed with the others. It was a period when the religion of Mexico took on new aspects, aspects we usually find when people have just emerged from disorder and chaos into what they believe will be only a short interlude of peace. The people began to worship the sun, the moon, the stars as their chief gods, above Tlaloc, the rain god. Theirs was a fatalistic religion. They believed that the world was balanced on the edge of destruction, and they lived in fear of the end of the universe. Remember, we said earlier that every 52 years, the two counts of the calendar coincided, creating a period of great supernatural crisis. Well, during those 5 evil days at the end of the last year of the 52-year cycle, the people let their fires die out and destroyed their furniture. The temple fires were extinguished, and the entire population awaited catastrophe. Then, when the new year began and they believed themselves safe for another 52 years, a new fire ceremony was held. The temple fires and then the home fires were rekindled. Life began again. But at any time, the well-being of the people depended upon the favor of the gods. Man could assure himself of this favor by presenting offerings to the gods. Man remembered only too well the chaos and death that followed when he had neglected the gods. We've talked about human sacrifice at Teotihuacan. But now, in this period of reawakening of his obligations to the gods, man began to give more and more of his most precious gift, life itself. The gods had not been satisfied with gifts of food and the arts. At first, sacrificial victims came from the community, but as the number of sacrifices increased, victims had to be found in other cities and states. And wars were fought for the purpose of capturing sacrificial victims. It was a vicious circle. For the more sacrifices that were made, the greater the demand of the gods, and thus the necessity for war was increased. Now, out of the religious, political, social confusion following the destruction of Tula was to grow perhaps the greatest civilization, certainly the greatest empire that Mexico had ever known, the Aztec Empire. For through trade and war, the Aztecs eventually would dominate most of the populated areas of Middle America. Even today, most people outside of Mexico think of the Aztecs as the only people of ancient Mexico. These people began their role in Mexican history in an unpretentious manner. They belonged to one of the Chichimec tribes, the Colwa Mexica. Remember, the Chichimecs were the invaders from the north. Towards the end of the 13th century, the Colwa Mexica were to be found serving as mercenaries in the armies of Tula. And after the fall of Tula, they were weak, constantly on the run, avoiding the warlike designs of stronger tribes. until they found refuge on an island in Lake Texcoco. There, in about 1345, they founded their city, Mexico Tenochtitlan, which later was to become the site of present-day Mexico City. Aztec legend regarding the founding of Tenochtitlan tells us that in a cave, the wandering tribe found their god, Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird wizard, who could speak and gave good advice. Huitzilopochtli told them they were to settle where they found a bird sitting on a cactus eating a serpent, the symbol also of modern Mexico. Thus, the new god led the Aztecs to Lake Texcoco. In reality, they probably were driven to the lake by their enemies, and they founded Tenochtitlan in the shadow of another and more powerful city, Tlatelolco. For many years, the Aztecs lived almost as parasites of that older city, but all the while they were gathering strength, building their powerful capital, and eventually they were able to conquer Tlatelolco. The Emperor Quetzalcoatl ruled the Aztecs from 1428 to 1440. During his reign, great temples were built and causeways constructed to join Tenochtitlan with the mainland. During Quetzalcoatl's reign, the Triple Alliance was formed. Tenochtitlan became an ally of the two other leading city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan. These three powers divided the Valley of Mexico between them. But toward the end of the 15th century, the Aztecs were powerful enough to subjugate their allies, to defeat Tlacopan in battle, and to install a puppet ruler in Texcoco. By 1500, the Aztecs were a formidable military state, dominating the whole of the Valley of Mexico. And within a few years, Aztec control would be expanded throughout Mexico. Control which was not challenged until the Spaniards arrived from across the sea in 1519. Control which was not only military, but social as well. For as the Aztec state grew and its military power increased, a complex social and political organization had developed, an organization which we'll discuss in the next lesson.